Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Sincerely Agile with Mary. Now, on this platform, for those of you who are already, followers of our platform, you know that we promote the growth mindset on this platform. We talk a lot about professionalism, but of course, you and I know that professionalism and humanity they are not mutually exclusive. So today, I'm particularly excited at the topic we are going to be having a conversation around today, and it is reimagining fatherhood. And I have the amazing Brian, who has written a book about it here today. Hello, Brian. I'm just going to bring you up. There you
Hello.
go.
Yes. Hi. How are you?
How are you, Brian? Thank you
I
for making the time to be here with us today.
sure. No, I'm honored to be here. Excited for this conversation.
I'm even more excited. I mean, I've started reading the book. I have my copy right here.
Great.
Now, our topic today, reimagining fatherhood. Just before I brought you to the screen, professionalism and humanity, they are not mutually exclusive. So I believe this is a conversation we should be having at this point in time. But, just to ask you the question, why might a conversation about fatherhood be an important one to have today?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple reasons. Your preamble there kind of speaks to it, right? I think so many dads and fathers have been divorced emotionally, mentally from their family because they've been told for so many years now to be working, to be growing professionally, making more money, and the more money you make, the more value you are to your family. And while there's obviously some truth to making sure you have a budget that will buy clothes for your kids and whatnot, that's not the end all of fatherhood. It's not the end all of being a dad. And so I've found in many conversations that more men who are able to tap into their emotions, to build emotional relationships at home just as much as anywhere else, there's more health and more positive benefits going on so that dads have the resources to weather those challenges. And society, also looking to society, especially in Western culture and here in the United States, where I'm based and the work we do, we see a lot of negative statistics out there around domestic violence, around depression, social isolation,
Yeah.
especially from the pandemic, and dads who are not resilient, dads who don't have the skills to be resilient or to be flexible when they have a downturn in the economy, if they lose their job, if their identity around their work is taken away from them, we see that end in very tragic and negative ways. And so I think the work that we're doing at Fathering Together, the work that I do on my own in coaching or building communities in my neighborhood and elsewhere, and partner organizations as well. There's plenty of groups that we collaborate with because our name is Fathering Together. We don't
Yeah.
see ourselves as in this alone. We're all kind of trying to reimagine how we see fathers in our culture. How are we creating opportunities for dads to redefine their role, redefine the relationships, uh, finding that inner strength when something does tragic happen. Okay, how do we weather that storm? How do we rebuild? And we need to do that from the home life where dads and moms are working together, or dads and partners are working together to have healthy systems for their family to grow and evolve together, but also in the workplace where we've had panels on the importance of parental leave for all caregivers, right? Not just for biological parents, but adoptive parents of children who need to take leave to help their elderly
Yeah.
parents, right? Like that's a fast growing situation in many parts of the world where the previous generations are outnumbering us younger folk. And so how do we create systems in the workplace and in the home space for a more holistic approach to life? And so like we should have been having this conversation decades ago, right? And
Yeah.
thankfully there were pockets of it. I think my dad, as I say in my book, my dad was very much ahead of his time in wanting to be caring and approachable for my sister and I. And there's several other dads that I know that are my age that were in similar situations, but the vast majority of dads that I engage with are breaking that cycle now. And they had a dad who taught them all the wrong things to do. And so they're their framework for being a good dad is whatever my dad didn't do. And while that will take you so far, you need some healthy practices in there. You need some positive reinforcement, not just
Absolutely.
the negative ones. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that can go either way. It could be I'm going to do everything my dad did, or I'm going to do everything he didn't do, something like that.
Right.
And if I can just take you back a little bit, you said something about sometimes when men as breadwinners, the head of the family, which is how men have been identified for decades, when they lose that identity, it can go horribly wrong.
Right.
And this is because men forever have been validated in that way, so to
Right.
speak,
Right.
not valuing the man so much from the family point of view, as a caregiver, as someone who says, I love you 10 times a day, kind of thing. So once that identity is lost, it can be quite tragic. And that is because we're not taking that holistic approach to
Right.
parenting or fatherhood or motherhood, as it were. So, but now we have a few people that have joined us. I want to read out your bio so that our audience can get to know you just a little bit
Sure.
better. So, I'm going to do that right away. Brian Anderson is a husband, father, and gender equity advocate. In his professional life, he is the director of Foundation Relations for IC Stars, a non-profit organization launching tech careers for the underserved. He is also the co-founder and board president of Fathering Together, which empowers dads to be emotionally connected to their children and agents for positive change in their communities. While serving as the founding executive director at Fathering Together, he worked with dozens of companies and hundreds of dads to translate their professional skills into home life strategies. I love that. In his personal life, you can find him traveling with his family, cooking with his daughters, and playing lots of card games. In September 2022, he published his first book, Fathering Together, Living a Connected Dad Life, which lays out servant leadership as a model for fatherhood. That is just simply awesome. And I have the book here. And I need to start by saying this is not just a book for men or fathers. I think it is also a book for women so that they can also be positioned to help their men, to help their children's father, as it were, to help them become a better father. So this is a book for everybody. This is going to be my new wedding present for new couples now. Trust me. So when you see the sales going up with Mary Lanion buying all the books, that's a present for new couples for me going forward. Now, thank you so much, Brian, for making the time to be here today. Like I said before, humanity and professionalism, they are not mutually exclusive. Now, you've said quite a bit here and there, but what really motivated you to write a book about fatherhood?
Yeah, I had a professional mentor many years ago who wrote who he has written many books himself, and he told me never write a book unless you can't sleep, right? Like if you have something in you that has to get out and is causing you to lose sleep, then you should probably write a book about it. So as the organization Fathering Together kept growing, we would see so many dads struggling or asking for guidance or sharing guidance to other dads. And I saw this trend around servant leadership. And I did a little bit of research, did some interviews with dads, and found that there wasn't really a direct line between the kind of the corporate leader that is a servant leader that has been around forever, really, adopted and coined by Robert Greenleaf in the 60s. There wasn't a direct translation or line to fatherhood. And yet, when you look at those basic tenets of servant leadership, where you care for your employees, you create opportunities for your employees to grow and really live into the mission of the company that they work for, it makes your job easier as their manager, right? Or the CEO to say, hey, we made profit because we supported our staff. Well, for me as a dad, there's so many parallels there, right? Like I'm not raising my children to always be children. I don't want my children to grow up always having to look for me to support them or to like go to their job interviews, like be that helicopter parent that we hear about. I want my kids to grow up to be fierce, independent leaders, to be feminist challengers of the status quo. And so what can I be doing to elevate their critical thinking, their ability to make friends, own their own identity, and really be an advocate for themselves, where I can step back and support them in all that they want to do. And all of those things come out in conversations I have with dads in various ways. Right now, we don't all have the same language, but 99% of the dads I would talk to informally or eventually formally for my book had this idea of, I want my kids to be great, right? I want them to be an Olympic champion. I want them to go to the moon. I want them to be the president. All these grand ideas that we have. And we can't do that if we're dictating to them, you have to go to bed at this time, you have to eat these things, you cannot have an opinion of your own until you get out of the house. Like, none of that works. So I kind of just had to write it. And as I kept writing, like in my journal or on blogs, it kind of formed into this book. And I think the other piece of it too was, as we were in the midst of this pandemic a few years ago, and to some extent still, like, kind of navigating through the aftermath, it was an opportunity for us to really rethink a lot of things, how our families were structured, how our work in the home was divided and shared. And so I just kind of wrote the book because I needed to get it out of my system. And,
Yeah.
The interviews brought a lot of other content out there. There may be more books down the road, but for now, that burning desire to write a book got satiated for now. Yeah.
And I can see you've done a great job. And I'm just going to come back to your book, but I'd like to carry our audience along. We have Olayemi here. We have Ronke here. We also have people on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Great. Welcome.
Now, let's start with the first page of your book.
Yeah.
Will you do us the honors and read just that introduction to the book? Just that first page. I
Yes.
think it's quite powerful, and it's a call to action.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this book is a love letter to my fellow dads. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you don't say I love you enough to your friends, let alone your partner or children. So let me start with it here. I love you, man. Not because I know you, but because you've taken a leap to being a dad. And with that leap comes a world of responsibilities none of us are prepared for, even if we read every book and go to every prenatal appointment. In this love letter to you, I'm laying out a challenge I hope you agree to pick up. This challenge is to reimagine fatherhood. It is one based on servant leadership and connection. And if you're reading this, it probably means one of two things. You're expecting a new baby and you want to start off on the right foot, or you're already a dad and you're looking to repair and strengthen your relationship with your children. So either
Absolutely.
way, glad you're here, and let's get going.
Thank you very much. Either
Yeah,
you're starting the journey or you're trying to repair that journey of fatherhood. And you say here, it is one based on servant leadership and connection. I
right.
mean, you said, not quite long ago, you talked about how, as a professional, as a CEO, as a director within our organization, we're talking about servant leadership all day long. We're talking about how we can connect with our employees, how we can have, employees that are, uh, um, purposefully engaged. But how do we take that home, you know, and use those same strategies to build our homes? That is that's a really good way to put it. So we will come back to that. Now, who have dads been? So who dads have been and who they can be. Tell us more about that, because that is essentially what your book is about, right? Who dads have been and who they can be. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that fatherhood has taken many shapes and forms over the history
Yeah,
of humanity. Right? There's
yeah,
no one definition of fatherhood.
yeah,
We can come in all shapes and sizes. And as we were talking about before the call, fatherhood, the term itself, I outline in the book that fatherhood itself is the biological act, right? Like, so fatherhood, to be a father, quote unquote, is that biological act. But to be a dad and to be a connected dad is really a state of mind and an approach, and one that is tied to actively engaging and educating and being in conversation and relationship with your kids. And that has also evolved over the years, right? And before the Industrial Revolution, many dads did work at home, right? They were farmers that went into the field, or carpenters, or blacksmiths, you name it. And then as we kind of really started to advance and differentiate our jobs and our abilities, we saw this kind of idea that dads could go away and they traveled, or they were soldiers and went to war. And there was this disconnection that happened. And there's some great books out there um, that talk about how communities historically would reintegrate men when they went to war or were gone for long periods of time. And some of that has been lost in this kind of amalgamation
Yeah.
of things. But what's not lost is dads still being around, and kind of evolving into who they can be. And so in the past, we've had all these different definitions. But as we were just talking about, the one that is kind of been solidified is dads are breadwinners, and they bring home the financial support and don't interfere with the wife, who is, you know, building the home, is raising the children, doing all the activities and everything. And there are still people do that, and that is not a judgment by me to say it's right or wrong. If you and your partner have made a plan where you divide the work in such a way and it works, go for it, right? But if it starts to not work, make sure you have communication and strategies to adapt. But for so many dads, and even before the pandemic, we saw this trend where women started outpacing their husbands with income. We saw more dads choosing to be the primary caregiver and remaining home. There's an amazing organization called the National At-Home Dad Network here in the United States. They have an annual conference, and they have drop-in chats and conversations for dads who are the primary caregiver. Huge supporter of that organization. But that trend started to evolve, where there was not a level playing field by any means, right? But more and more dads were stepping in and saying, you know what? My wife has the skills to be an amazing accountant or an amazing lawyer or any number of high profile jobs. I don't have that ambition for myself. I've always wanted to be a dad. And so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to change how my family works. And I think that is where I would love to see opportunities return for dads and see who dads can be, as it were. Because we all have special skills, right? We're all gifted and talented in our own ways. But for example, my wife and I, when we first got married, she owned a condo. She had a well-paying job. I had a furnished apartment on a university where I was doing ministry work. She had a lot more assets. She was a lot more put together than I was. And when we talked about, getting married and having children, we joked that if she were to decide to be a stay-at-home mom, we would have to really rethink our financial strategy, because she was making almost twice what I was making at that time. 12 years later, things have changed and evolved, but that opportunity for her to continue to thrive and for me to have an opportunity to stay home gives us more flexibility, gives us more opportunity to imagine a life versus being this structured binary of like, well, I guess my wife may make more, but we're going to take a pay cut, so I have to keep working and she stays home. Like, that doesn't make sense for me. It doesn't make sense to my wife. And so we reimagined it and made it work. And I think so many more dads are like that. And so getting to a place where we allow dads to tap into their emotion, to tap into their other skill sets, while simultaneously uplifting women and fighting for gender equity in the workplace, just seems like it creates more opportunity for everyone. Could just be me, I don't know, but it just seems like that's a better way to go about it than holding on to these rigid traditions that just confine people's opportunities.
And you've just hit the nail on the head there, holding on to tradition. This is the way we've always done it. This is how we
Right.
know it to be. And we just must continue with that, tradition. I mean, you said something earlier on. If it's not working, to then be able to have a conversation about it. I mean, that level of awareness so that we can have a conversation about it. And I think that is the critical thing, for people to be aware of the kind of family life that they want to design. So
Yeah.
being very, very intentional about designing our family. I like the way Timothy Clark talks about culture. He says he talks about psychological safety a lot. He says, if you do not design your culture intentionally, I mean, we're talking from an organizational perspective here. If you do not intentionally design a culture, the culture that you want, a culture will emerge,
Right.
and it may not be the culture you want. And to be quite frank, I think a lot of us have taken that approach to family life. A lot of us have just gotten married. I love you, you love me, young boy, young girl, gotten married, never really sitting down to say, what kind of a family do we want to design? We
Yeah.
need to intentionally design that. And again, your family will be unique to any other person's family.
Right.
It's your decision how you want to run it. Stay at home mom or stay at home dad. And for me, there will never be a time where any profession is more important than raising our children. There will never be that time.
Yeah.
For so long, I've told women, if you're a stay at home mom, you are doing the most important job in the world. You are, the best project manager there is. So we need to start looking at these things differently. And if we are to be honest with ourselves, let's go back to the Stone Ages when the men were like the ones who went out there. The women definitely were the ones who stayed at home. When those lines were very, very well defined. Let's go back a little bit to that time. So the men went out there, macho, they could go wrestle a lion or whatever. The women stayed at home to, they come back with all the spoils and they do the cooking, take care of the children. But like you said earlier on, times have moved on. So today, we, especially being in a knowledge economy, especially given how things have evolved for women, a woman can match a man intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we have also become earners. Okay. We also go out there, we earn. The family dynamics may shift a little bit, but the family does not need to suffer because of that. If we are coming together to have the right conversation and to intentionally design our families
Yeah.
very intentionally.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. Now, for women, I like this question a lot.
Uh-huh.
For women, we hear it a lot. Oh, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. You're 30, you're 35, you're 45. The clock is ticking. Is the clock also ticking for men? And I ask this because I want to know, is there a great time to be a dad? Do you have to do it before you're 30? We've seen how, some people in the news recently at 70 something have become dads. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is the clock also ticking for men?
Yeah, there's a new movie I saw coming out or just came out in the US called Old Dads, talking about dads who are older having kids. And yeah, I think, not to name names, but if you're the age of most people's grandparents or even great grandparents, I don't know if it's a good time to have a child because you're not going to be around, right? Like, and so I think there's no right age though. I'm not going to like qualify and get myself caught in a fight with someone, but I think the right time is what works for you and your family,
Mhm.
your partner, right? And it's also when you have the ability and the maturity to know that you're bringing in a life to the world that will need you for quite some time, potentially 40 or 50 years. I still call my dad regularly when I have home repair questions because he's much better at it than I am. So I think like in the traditional sense, no, there's no one like looking at men like tapping and saying like, hey, but there are societal pressures in terms of like, are you settling down? Are you having a family? But unfortunately, it's all framed from this dichotomy of men are allowed to be wild and crazy, and so are wild oats, and date around, and it doesn't matter if we're a virgin, and all of these kind of like toxic kind of messages that allow us to divorce ourselves from relationship, divorce ourselves from meaningful responsibilities, and but then when we're ready, we can settle down and do it right. There's a great comic that a friend of mine shared with me, and it's a 3-pane comic, simple, stick figure drawing, and the first is two dads talking. One's like, are you going to let your son play like that? And then he's like, what do you mean? And then it cuts to a little boy playing with dolls. And you hear the dad say, the second dad responding, are you afraid he's going to be a good dad? And the final caption is both dads holding babies and bottle feeding them. And so, it's just a great, like, I don't know, mirror to the hypocrisy of like, we want boys to be aggressive and play and do all these things. But then as soon as they hit 25 or 30, think about settling down and having a kid and being married and all these things. And yet when they're a child, we're not giving them time to play. We're not getting them time to act out what they might have to do later in life. And that's a tragedy, real tragedy. So it's not so much a question of, is the clock ticking for men biologically, but it's more, are you in a place to be present and to really teach your children what it means to be a good human and a good parent down the road, allowing them that freedom to make mistakes and learn from them, but also see you make mistakes and be
Mm.
sad and happy and all the emotions that we have. So
Interesting. Thank you very much for that.
yeah.
Now, how do we help our children cultivate a learning mindset? And I think this is very important given the environment we're in today. There's a lot of distraction.
Hmm.
I mean, social media, like you and I know, is a double-edged sword, right?
Right.
So, as a father, as a parent, how can we really help bring some of those strategies we talk about within our work environment? How can we bring that home and help them cultivate a learning mindset?
Yeah, and since writing this book, I don't know if learning mindset is the right term anymore, but I think it's more a curiosity mindset, right? Like, how do
Okay,
we
I like
build
that.
curiosity, right? And then how do we learn from those curious moments or learn from the experiences? So
Hmm.
I'm not going to read my book just for that one term, but I think for me, it's how do I role model that curiosity in my own life, and how do I instill that love of learning, not to like study just to get an A on a test, but really to comprehend it and then apply that knowledge is fascinating. I actually just posted about this morning on LinkedIn. um, Not necessarily thinking about this conversation we were having, but yesterday, we were all sick at my house, and thankfully we've all recovered. They're back at school, but I kind of had to make a list of like, how are we going to get through our day, right? Like, let's break the day up because I have my meetings, I have other things I have to do. I can't just like cuddle on the couch with you all day and watch movies. And so we had this like 2 hour block of time where I was like, all right, you two have to play without screens in the basement, and then we'll have lunch. And they took that time to make a video with their iPad. They had an iMovie application that they used. And while I was in a meeting and working on a report, they were running around the house, going outside, doing cartwheels, and obviously like they're supposed to be sick, but clearly they weren't that sick to do all these things. But they took what they knew and created something beautiful out of it. And they found stuff online. They were like going back into like our Google Calendar or Google like folder account and pulling things up to make this little like video montage. And that's what I hope as parents we can craft in our children, where we can say, all right, you get free reign for the next hour to be creative. What
Yeah.
can you come up with? What can you be curious about?
Hmm.
And not just sit in front of a screen and not just
Yeah.
use the TV as a nanny or a babysitter.
Yeah.
um there's a lot of great programming out there, right? There's some really cool shows for kids, and I'm not saying don't use screens or
Hmm.
television, whatnot, because screens are here forever, right? They're here to stay. But how do we help them shift from being just consumers to being creators, and how do we help them navigate the tools that they will need, set their expectations appropriately? And that
Hmm.
ultimately starts with us. And what are we doing to represent that in our own lives as well? And so I'm constantly, reading books. I'm constantly inviting them out to explore,
Hmm.
going on a hike, going to a movie, going to a theater show, or getting them into sports lessons and things to help them define what they want to be later in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of us are not destined to be an Olympic athlete, so we can fool around. We can try soccer, football, gymnastics, whatever. And then if we strike on something that's great and wonderful, go for it. But let's have that space to be fun and creative and curious.
Yes, and including that outdoor space into the mix as well. Like you said, it's
Yeah,
not just about, I mean, education is important. It's not just about the pressure of coming home with straight A's. It's about exploring life as well, doing more of that as
yeah,
well, and supporting them in doing that. And also helping them, just take an interest in what else that do they love to do, what else do they like to do. Some children like to draw, some like to sing. I mean, I'm coming from a community where for so long you needed to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an accountant. You couldn't walk to your parents and say you wanted to be an artist. They're
right,
going to ask you, is that going to put food on the table? You wanted to be a singer. So but
yeah,
things are changing now. Parents are leaning more towards their children's creativity, trying to help them find that balance. So I think that that is quite important. So thank you for the way you've answered that. Now, another question here. What is the role of courage in parenting?
Mm. Yeah, I think so. For me, I talk
Mm,
about in the book emotional courage, and
mm,
I think that's for men at least. That's the
mm-hmm,
growing edge. That's our challenge to one another is how do you
mm-hmm.
show emotion?
Yeah.
How do you change your mindset from if I have to show an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
that's sad or vulnerable, that's not
Yeah.
actually a weakness, right? And so by being courageous to our children on all levels, right? Like, because as you said earlier, like I'm not going out and fighting bears and tigers anytime soon. And if I am, I'm going to lose. Let's be honest. I'm not that fast, and and definitely not that strong. But uh, I can be emotionally courageous, and I can show my kids that I stood up to a challenge, that I faced my fears, and help them process their own fears and find a way past them. It's not always easy. I was talking with some friends the other day that I've been getting frustrated. There's been, I'm noticing some anger in me at times with my kids, and it's not because they're being bad kids. They're just being kids. But it really comes down to like I'm not smart enough to help them over this next developmental stage. Like I got to go back to the books. Like I got to go beef up my knowledge and prepare for this next developmental milestone that they're both approaching. But because they're going faster than I'm ready, I keep saying no and getting frustrated with them for pushing those envelopes. And so, uh, for me, in those moments, courage is opening up to my kids. And being that they're 9 and 7, I'm not having, master's level dissertation kind of conversations with them. They're developmentally appropriate, but I'm explaining to them, like, okay, daddy got angry. I'm going to put myself in timeout, or I need to go like have some quiet time and recenter myself. And and for a parent to open up and remove that kind of power dynamic with a child can be scary, but it can be so much more fruitful when we do that. And I think that is something that I see a lot of dads struggle with. My dad struggled with it at times. I still struggle with it. I'm by no means a shining example of perfection, but
Mm,
by being open and courageous with how I talk to my kids about my emotions, about what I'm going through, you know, they start to develop a language that they can then use later in life.
mm,
They can start to recognize, like, hey, I can go to my dad for a lot of things, but sometimes maybe mommy is more important
yeah.
in this situation. Or even better, like as we talk about it fathering together, who's another dad in their community, right? Like my neighbor is an amazing musician, and he'll often be playing guitar in the backyard, and my girls will go over and kind of have an impromptu guitar lesson with him and his kids. And my neighbor across the street is a coding person, right? And so as they get interested in coding, I'm going to go have them talk with him, right? So we all have these gifts and talents, and to have a community to send our children to is not a weakness on me by any means. It's allowing them to recognize their dad has specific skills and can be strong and courageous in one area, and he has the resources, and we're blessed to have those resources to go to other role models and mentors and parents to help make the life enriched, which is, I know we're getting ahead because of your questions, but which is why I kind of end my book on how do we find and create community for ourselves, because our partners are great. I love my wife to death, but she's only so much as well, right? We're only so much for each other. We need other community members. We need other people in our life to balance everything out.
That is just simply awesome. I like how you said they could go to this other dad. Who is the other dad in the community? And me coming from an African heritage,
Sure.
we do have a proverb that says that it's not the parent, it's not only the parent that brings up the child. And this is coming from an era where we truly had that community, kind of way of living. Globally, that was the case. I mean, capitalization and everything, modernization has brought, has changed things, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much. So we've lost a lot of that community spirit that we had and community living that we had. And today we have a different kind of community, an online community, if you
Hmm.
like.
Hmm.
Like I said before, the internet is it's a double-edged sword.
Sure.
So sometimes it's like, you're highly connected, but you're lonely. You're highly connected, but people are committing suicide.
Yeah.
So for me, this conversation we're having about reimagining fatherhood is a critical one. It's an important one. We don't live by being a professional alone. Now, talking about the courage there, I was thinking vulnerability.
Hmm.
It is important for us as parents, especially the fathers, if you like, to be able to model that, because traditionally men are not supposed to cry, right? Men
Right.
are not supposed to show emotions, even when things are going downhill, you're supposed to, put up your macho front and all of that. So I really like the way you answer that. We need to be able to show that level of vulnerability. And nobody is a superhero. I can't possibly know everything. You can't possibly know everything. So, and this is where that community becomes so important.
Yeah.
Who else in who can do, what I can't do in the community?
Yeah.
Okay, there are certain things I can do perhaps that other people cannot do in the community. That is where the mix comes becomes very enriching. So that is quite a way to have answered that. And I really appreciate the way you answered that. It's very important that we are able to be vulnerable with our children. Now, I think we've talked about this a little bit. The world is changing faster than most of us can keep up. How do we help as parents to navigate that, especially in this digital age where a young man committed suicide recently because a couple of young guys from another part of the world was bullying him online,
Sure.
um, taking advantage of him. They were going to, exploit him. And there's a lot of that going on. We could be at home, our children are online, we don't know what they're doing. It's a scary world today. A lot of young people have committed suicide. How can we really help our children? And bearing in mind we are busy parents, right? We're gone from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock. By the time some parents come back home, their children are sleeping
Yeah. Yeah.
and they hardly know their children.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that we are paying for that is quite expensive given the advancement of the world, as it were. But given it is what it is, how can we help them navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, my girls are getting close enough to the age where the talk is about to happen in terms of, the birds and the bees and relationships and all that kind of stuff. And as my wife and I prepare for that, we're also thinking about internet safety and all these other things you talk about. And I think it's important to recognize that it's never just one talk. With kids, it has to be multiple conversations in multiple avenues and topics for it to sink in. I mean, just think about like how often is it that we get one directive from our parents, or not from our parents but from our boss, and we get the job perfect, right? Like oftentimes there's a couple meetings, there's emails back and forth, there's drafting, there's edits and all that kind of stuff that go into products and everything. And so to just assume that as a parent we have to do it one time and then we're good to go is definitely the wrong mindset to cultivate. And while that seems like it's going to be a lot more work because now I have to have like 15 conversations, in reality it's like 15 little sidebars, right? It's the quick little like walk to school, the drop off, just saying like, hey, how your day is going, hey, what is up, what's going on with so and so. When I would talk with dads, I would always ask them like, do you know your child's best friend's name, and
Hmm.
do you know why they're best friends? And most of the time, dads will know the name of the child's best friend, but they won't necessarily know the why behind it, right? Or I'll ask, a dad like, hey, what did your kid do yesterday? And they might rattle off one or two things, but they won't necessarily know why or the deeper context. And it's to your point, we're so busy and we're so rapidly involved in other things, that we miss out on these tiny opportunities. But when we have these tiny opportunities, we can't let them go. We can't miss those opportunities for a quick deep dive into, hey, how is this or how's that? And when we can name a child that our child is friends with, that gives us some street cred, right? Like now your kid knows that you pay attention. And but to going back to like the internet and sex education and all these other things, having quick little like 5-minute conversations where you kind of react to something your kid has seen, or you know in our culture today, there's so many things that pop up. So if you even if you just spend 15 minutes talking to your child while you watch a child's TV show, or you go on YouTube or Instagram, TikTok, maybe they're looking over your shoulder when you're on your own feed and they see something they shouldn't. Don't ignore that moment, right? Turn it into a teachable moment. Be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't have seen that yet, or that is something for parents to worry about, but here's the context for you. And help them frame the reality there is critical. But aside from having the one-on-one conversations in small bits and pieces, it's also really important to know that with all of this technology, there's a ton of technology that we have to protect our children and to help them make sense of things, right? There's online tools to block certain content. There's resources in our school systems, hopefully at your child's school, that you can download or use, maybe at your church community or some other parenting group that you're connected to. And so again, we're not alone in this. People have been figuring it out. And so talking with a parent who's a couple years ahead of you on the parenting journey may open some doors to tools that you didn't know that were available to you. And
that's the power of community,
and the
isn't
power
it?
of community. Yeah, I'll
That's
leave
the
it at
power
that.
of community. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the power of community. Now, talking about finding moments to have those conversations with our children, we really need to practice the act of listening,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because a lot of us parents, we're not listening. That is the truth. I mean, I have been accused by my children at some point of not listening. And that takes me to when you said your daughter gave you a verbal slap.
Yes.
She gave you a verbal slap. This was a point where you felt you were so caught up in, working on the fathering together,
Yeah.
website and community. Now, how did that feel?
Yeah. I've had a few verbal slaps, so it took me a second to remember exactly what you meant. But just to provide some context to everyone, so I was working full time while we were trying to figure out what fathering together was to be, and so I was essentially working two jobs. Right, I would work all day for my day job, and then have dinner, and then jump back into crafting fathering together stuff. And at the time, my daughter was 6-ish, and I was putting her to bed, and she was at an age where she was wanting to read to herself or try to read to herself. So our evening ritual of bedtime had evolved. And so I was doing a quick like good night, kiss her on the cheek, and leave. And she kind of pulled away from me and was like, Dad, I see that you are doing all this work. Like, she was aware enough to know I was trying to help other dads. And so she said to me, Dad, you're being, a really good dad to all these other dads, but you're not being a good dad to me. And I've been a not great dad since then. So there's been other things she's thrown at me, but at the time, like, it was a big wake up call, and as you say, a verbal slap and like a metaphorical like knife to the chest, whatever illusion you want to think of. But it made me realize like the blessing and the curse of starting fathering together was that I had to practice what I was preaching all the time, every day, in every situation, while also building a system for other dads to do it as well. And so, thankfully, by the grace of something, we got some donation within a month of that verbal slap. And I was able to, take time away from my day job and kind of go full time with fathering together to really build the infrastructure that we wanted, and get it to a place where it is today, where we have a new executive director kind of taking the lead on everything. But it was a wake up call on so many levels to realize like it's not just about listening, but it's being present, right? Like
Being
I was
present.
at dinner, having dinner, but my phone was there and it would beep and I would look at it all the time. And so I was demonstrating to my kids that whatever was on my phone took
What's more
precedent over
important?
them,
Yeah.
right? And when I was rushing them to get to bed, or when I was frustrated and angry and saying hurry up, it was because I had something more important to do. And sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes you have a deadline that you just got to get done for work,
Yeah.
but 99% of the time, most of the time, you're in a place to say, okay, if it doesn't get done tonight, I can do it tomorrow morning, or I'll stay up later to get it done, right? Unless you're a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist that's working on a bomb, like chances are it's not so urgent that the world's going to end in the
Mm.
next 30 minutes if you take care of your child's needs. And so I doubled down. I re-envisioned, reacclimated, and my daughter is 9 now, and she loves to read to herself, but every once in a while we'll read together in her bed, and
Mm.
we'll read our own books, but it's just physically being there for our children,
Being
um,
present.
and being present. It's holding them when they're having a rough day. It's giving them a high five when they had a big accomplishment. It's making sure you go to the soccer games, the baseball games, football games, you
Yeah.
name it, and,
Yeah.
and making sure that they see you in a way, quote unquote, sacrificing your time for them.
Absolutely. Building
Yeah.
up their confidence, listening,
Building up their, yeah,
and like you said, it's not just all kind of thing. Actually listening and responding
yeah,
and asking questions because you have listened. Like you said earlier on, oh, they have a best friend called Annabelle or Peter. But why are they best friends?
yeah,
We need to take interest in what they do and the people they go around with. So,
right,
so, so important. I mean, around the dinner table, I mean, I know a lot of families would cultivate that habit of coming together for dinner,
yeah,
or maybe on a Sunday. Those are also small strategies
yeah,
and little things we can do to get the family together. I know a lot of young people want to be on their phone as well, but if we're intentional about it, we can really come together around the, dining table and truly intentionally ask questions like how are you, and really
right,
mean that and want to listen,
yeah,
because we often just say, how are you, how was your day, and that's it, but really mean that and to be prepared to listen.
yep, yep.
Interesting,
And then
interesting.
act on it, right? If it
And
was,
then act on it if you have to.
if it's something you need to act on, if it's,
Absolutely.
even if it's just responding with
Yeah.
congratulations or good job,
Yes.
like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. And you also said something earlier on, we can't just, yes, we are the parent. Yes, we have the authority, but we need to go into that negotiation space often enough as well,
yeah,
such that they have a say.
yeah,
And talking about that, I mean, this is a vulnerable moment for me. Um, when I came to England, I always had this belief in me that I would like my children to go back home at some
mm,
point, just so that they can have a sense of belonging, know where they're from, and I did do that at some point when they were growing up. And I never realized that my daughter was extremely angry with me for taking her back home.
mm,
She said, "You didn't ask me." That's what she said. I mean,
yeah,
she said this so many years later.
yeah,
She said, "You did not ask us. You just bundled us to Nigeria."
yeah,
And that is true. I didn't ask them.
yeah,
I just went ahead with my plan. I want my children to go to Nigeria. And that offended the first two. I've got four children.
yeah,
They were like, "Mommy, you didn't ask us." So, I mean, I look back and indeed I didn't ask them. I just took that parental decision. I want my children to go to Nigeria, and so be it. Although they enjoyed it, there were some benefits in there for them. I mean, several years later, my daughter would say, "Actually, Nigeria was fun." But the fact
right,
still remains that I did not ask them.
right,
Okay, so that is a lesson for us parents. Our children are not too young for us to call them and sit them down and have a conversation with them. Sometimes they are wiser.
yeah, yeah.
That is the truth.
Well, or they just see things in a different way
In a
that you
different
were
way.
not thinking through, right? Like just thinking about like height, right? Our kids are shorter than us most of the time. We walk through life seeing things at our eye level. They're going to see stuff that we don't see, or
Exactly.
get a new perspective.
A
And
different perspective.
yeah, but also I think using your trip as an example, like obviously sometimes you just you could have talked to them, but you're still going to go, right? Like as a parent, there's still like, no, we're going to go, we're going to have a vacation.
Yeah.
But I think much like at work, where you have this broad projects,
Yeah.
a major event or a major
Hmm.
push to launch a product, there are so many levels to insert ideas and creative talent from your team, right? And like I've got, I'm the director, I'm the manager, so I have to see the broad vision, but I don't know how to do this part or that part. But
Yeah.
thankfully, I have a team with skills
Yeah.
to manage that. And so I think having that mindset shifted, and as you said in my introduction, like that's where I go with dads when I'm coaching them, is to help them translate how they think about managing their team into the family, not because their kids are employees or their partners, a mid-level manager, but it's like, how do I engage? How do I use the skills that have been pushed onto me and trained in me in my professional development in the same way that I want to engage with my staff or with my
Absolutely.
family?
Yeah.
And if you're not a good boss, right, like maybe there's some work you got to do on both fields, both sides, but the more you can insert opportunities for your kids to say, here's something that I know that will benefit my family, then they see themselves as an active part of that family and have ownership and agency within the family, just as much as you want your team to have agency over products that go out the door, events that you're hosting. If I'm just there to sign a paper, cross a T, dot an I, do whatever, and I have no ownership or no investment into the
Yeah.
final say of a product, I'm not going to be as good of an employee as I could be. And the same is
Absolutely.
true as our kids, right? We want
Mm.
them to feel like whatever event is coming up, that they have a role to play. And so
Mm.
for those that you really young kids, they're going to want to help set the table, even if they
Hmm.
can't lift the plate. They're going to
Hmm.
want to cut things when you're not ready to give them a sharp knife. So
Absolutely.
find levels that they can
Hmm.
enter and engage in those activities, and allow yourself to give up some of that control, which can be really
Absolutely.
hard, so hard for a lot of type A individuals. Like I'm
Hmm.
sure you and I both, Mary, with the projects we have underway, we need things to be done a certain way all the time. And if we aren't able to kind of separate some of the smaller tasks, then uh, it may not work as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. And like you said, someone might be a fantastic boss. I mean, like
Right.
everyone has only nice things to say about them, but they haven't really transferred those skills home
Right.
to build a great home.
Right.
And that can be coming from this is not because they want to be a bad dad. This is just because they feel that's something mommy needs to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is where the importance of this conversation, comes through. If you're a dad listening today, you're a great CEO, you're a great director, you're a great CTO. You can take those strategies back home
Yeah.
to design the kind of family you want. And just like we have interventions for our organizations, right? Where we're doing all this digital transformation and agile transformation, there's no time that you cannot have those interventions. It's not just about when they're babies. There's just
Yeah.
no time that we can't come back and say, you know what, I could repair this. And
Yeah.
you did say that in your book, whether you're just starting as a father, as a dad, or you're trying to repair. This is an opportunity for you to take a step back, reflect, get into that deep awareness of how things have been, like you
Yep.
said,
Yep.
the dads that we have been and the dads that we can be,
Yep.
because there's always that room for improvement.
Yep.
Right. So you got a slap in the face, a verbal slap in the face
Yep.
because of this community you've been working on. And I'm sure you've done a fantastic job. Now, why should any dad join this community?
Yeah. So I think the simple answer is fatherhood's not a solo journey. And if you were taught that you have to have all the answers and be the end all for your family without any support outside of that family, then you were given some misinformation. And so whether it's our community of Fathering Together or some other community that's local, I'm not, there's enough work to go around, right? We don't need everyone to be in part of our community, but our community really is invested in giving you social emotional skills, and giving you the the wherewithal to translate your professional life into your home. And so if those are things that you're wrestling with, that's a reason to join our community, or work with me directly or one of our coaches to kind of get some skills to do that. And we have lots of different dads who are coaches and entrepreneurs and leaders in the field, and we have just as many dads who are boots on the ground day laborers and guys who are working 3 jobs to make ends meet because the mother of their children is no longer in the picture for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
they've got to pick up some extra slack. Like, there are so many expressions of fatherhood in our world, and as we said earlier, not just biological dads. We have
Yeah.
grandpas, uncles, big brothers who are stepping in to help raise neighbors. This one dad in Malawi who I've gotten to know really well over the last few years. Because of what Malawi's situation economically, a lot of dads will leave the country and work elsewhere and send money back to support
Mm.
their family. And no judgment whatsoever, but that just means there's not a lot of dads. And in his neighborhood, he's kind of become a de facto dad for multiple families because he works in the government, and so he's got a stable job in the community and is able to be present in the evenings. And so he's doing what he can in partnership with us when possible, to build that kind of local support system for
Right.
children who need that guidance and support. And I think, while we are called Fathering Together and we are dedicated to building communities for dads to improve themselves and be agents for change, our ultimate goal is our children, right?
Yeah.
And our healthy partnerships in the home. And so the other reason to join really is just to be a better, more present collaborator in your life. No one says you have to be on 199,000% for fatherhood. We all need a little break from time to time, even if
Yeah.
it's just 15 minutes to go walk around the block and clear your head, or a day where you once a year even to go on a little personal retreat and disconnect and reconnect with things when you return. Like, there are moments where we need to flex our time, flex our relationships so that we can come back fully rejuvenated. And so at Fathering Together, during the pandemic, we focused fully on virtual communities and support through Zoom and other platforms. And now we're shifting to in-person events and activities. We have citywide chapters, and then we have school-based programs where dads are working with other dads at the elementary school, to provide some of this training and opportunity so that they're more engaged and active in the school system, not just in their own child's life. So lots of
Fantastic.
ways to engage, and happy and willing to help any dad who is in need.
Fantastic. So that's the website right there.
Yeah, fatheringtogether.org. Yep.
Yeah, and we also have a page for Fathering Together on LinkedIn, and Brian is also on LinkedIn. What an amazing conversation we have had here today. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been so enlightening. And go get the book. Go get the book. This is not just a book for fathers. Mothers, go get it too and read it so that you would also know how to support them in that journey of fatherhood. Now, next week, I have the amazing Bob Gallen coming to talk about becoming a badass agile coach. On that note, Brian, thank you so much for the time investment here today. Thank you
Yeah.
for the amazing work you're doing for humanity. Thank you for being on Sincerely Agile with Mary. And for our audience today on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, thank you for the time investment here with us. And this is where we draw this curtain. Thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.